Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming today. My name is Karen Cromer Lowe, and I am an Atlanta-based independent curator at the moment. I've been here for many, many decades. And today, we're going to have a conversation about Radcliffe Bailey as it relates to contemporary art. So the title of the panel today is Southern Ground, the Legacy of Radcliffe Bailey and the Future of Black Contemporary Art in the South. And when thinking about the contemporary art world, I look at art all the time, and I'm paying attention to what artists are doing and how they're moving, specifically Black contemporary artists. And I've started to notice that Atlanta now is a hub for artists who are working and showing outside of Atlanta. I go to many art fairs and art exhibitions in other states and other parts of the world, and I've been seeing these artists that are sitting on this stage in those spaces, and that wasn't happening before. And when I think about my connection to Radcliffe Bailey, for me, Radcliffe Bailey is the foundation for how artists and contemporary artists are able to build their artistic practices in this city. He was the first artist that I experienced who was living in Atlanta and who chose to have Atlanta as their base, but was represented by a blue chip gallery, and who had his work in major institutions like the Metropolitan Museum, the Whitney Museum, et cetera, but still came to Atlanta and had Atlanta as his home base. And because of that, and because of me being able to witness that, I've started to really pay attention to how artists who are based here, where they're showing and where they're exhibiting. And so today we have this esteemed panel of artists who are doing extraordinary work, and I'll introduce them by name. We have Sheila Pree Bright, if you could just, well, you can pick out who Sheila is. She's the only other woman there, right? We have Ato Ribeiro. We have Michi Meko and Navin Norling. And they are all based here in the city of Atlanta and doing extraordinary work of various mediums, and we'll get into some of that today. I chose this venue because at the exterior of the building is a public art piece by Radcliffe Bailey. It is called From the Cabinet. And if you didn't notice it on your way in, please do take a look at it on your way out. It's at the front of the building and at the exterior of the building. It's a two-part sculpture. And it's a gateway sculpture that taps into memory as medicine, which was a consistent theme of his. And the symbols are the ship, the oar, the ladder, the railroad tracks, and the DNA strand. And it's a dedication to his father, who was a railroad engineer. And also, it's a nod to historic Sweet Auburn and to Black excellence and resilience. And so please do take a look at that work. Also, before you leave today, I've put together a list of where Radcliffe Bailey has his public art pieces throughout the city. And so if you're interested, please do pick up that list. You can put together your own scavenger hunt. It'll be a lot of fun. Okay. You're welcome. So this panel, I'm going to move over to my seat, and I will have, I want to talk about this. This piece that you see on the screen is Windward Coast, and it's one of the iconic works by Radcliffe Bailey, and that's from 2009. And there were over 100 piano keys that was symbolic for the Atlantic waves, and it also represented the Middle Passage, and this is the cabinet that I just spoke to you about. The slides are moving slowly. But the Windward Coast spoke about his musical inheritance and his love for music, and so I wanted to put that work into context, and now we'll get started with the conversation with these artists. I have my notes. This one. Okay, so I'll get started with Sheila Pree Bright. She is a lens-based artist here in Atlanta, and I'll have you introduce yourself, Sheila. Actually, this photograph here is a photograph that Sheila Pree Bright took when she first met Radcliffe Bailey in Houston. So maybe you want to start there, Sheila. Mic on. Turn it on. No. No. No.
Okay, you can hear me now. Okay. I met Radcliffe in the 90s. I had graduated from college. I was, what do you call it? I'm a little bit nervous, believe it or not. But I met Radcliffe in Houston, Texas. I was a self-taught photographer, and they had the Project Row Houses. Have you heard of the Project Row Houses? Well, that was the incubator of that, and I think he was around artists too. And I met him, and Kevin Sips is in the audience. And I met him, and I wasn't really into the arts part of it because I was photographing hip-hop culture in the 90s. And Kevin and I and Radcliffe was hanging out, and we would go. Kevin would tell you this story. I almost got them killed. But Radcliffe, I didn't understand his art at the time, but he always liked to find objects. And we were in the hood looking for those. And it was at night. And Kevin will tell you the story. He said I almost got them shot for in the hood at night looking for found objects. But that's what my introduction is with Radcliffe, and also the introduction into the art world besides photography. And so I call myself a lens-based artist now because I move through different genres of photography, from portraiture to conceptualness to documentary. And that's what you will see a lot in my work. I've been collected by the National Museum of African American Art, History, and Culture, the National Museum of Art Gallery in D.C., the Library of Congress. I could go on and on and on. And I have a large collection of my series of work at the High Museum of Art. And recently, Emory University, Duke University, and Rice University have acquired my archives. It's housed in some of my work. So, and I've shown, thank you. So I've shown all over the United States. I travel outside the United States, especially with my body of work called 1960 Now. I have a lot of different series, so when you see my work, you will see different elements of me. And I was not born in the South. People think I was born in the South, but I wasn't born in the South. And I do believe that Radcliffe really had an influence on me because he always, to me, was very mystical. His work was the ancestors, and me not knowing a lot of knowledge about my history and where I came from, because my parents are from the South. That's when I start diving into Southern culture. Because when I came here, I told my mother what in the world is going on in Atlanta, and she said, "Baby, you in the South." So it opened up a big door for me. So a lot of my work that I do is in Atlanta, but a lot of what I show is outside of Atlanta, just like Radcliffe.
Thank you, Sheila. Victor, my slides aren't moving. Thank you. Ato. I'll have you introduce yourself while I get the slide situation together.
Can you hear? Okay. Hi. So my name is Ato Ribeiro, and I came to Atlanta for high school up in Sandy Springs when it was still part of Atlanta. My two older brothers were at Morehouse, so my mom always said she wanted 3 Morehouse boys, so I didn't have a choice. I was going to go to Morehouse. But moving here at like 13 was tough for me because Ghana was like a large part of my upbringing. And the culture shock of switching to the US system and spelling color without a U and, you know, all the little things it was an interesting learning curve. Plus Atlanta was just an intimidating place for me because it was like a lot of people fighting in the clubs and I was just like, I'm not built for this. But anyway, I went to Morehouse, and when I was at Morehouse, that was when I started really feeling more at home in Atlanta. It was more in the city. I was in the AUC. I think the AUC is probably one of the most beautiful places in the country. But that was where I really started developing a sense of family here with other people that weren't necessarily from Atlanta, but we all congregated in the AUC. And while I was at Morehouse, a big part of my practice was like sharing with my brothers and sisters like parts of the Ghanaian culture that I grew up with that maybe they were like touching on, but like I would share, like I was working on this Anansi series that would go in depth into like the actual folklore of these stories to kind of share and have some stories of things that people could be proud of that I might be able to contribute to that conversation. After Morehouse, went back to Ghana. Wasn't going to talk about Anansi in Ghana, so I started talking about my African American side. Grew up with a lot of friends over there that really believed a lot of things that they learned through media about the States. So in their mentality, it was like, come here, find a white person that knows business, stay away from black people, because if you step on their shoes, you know you might die. So a lot of the work that I was doing when I was there was kind of based in charcoal erasing drawings, unearthing parts of my African American side of the family, trying to share the difficulty there was for African Americans to piece that history together. They were unfixed, so people would step on it accidentally. All these things were informed by things I learned at the AUC, which is also the first time I learned of Radcliffe. I'll come back to that because I didn't focus too much at the time. I knew of him. But it wasn't until I came back for grad school and I started finding a way to bridge my practice together so it didn't keep changing when my audiences kept changing. So I was in the printmaking department and I was determined to try and fuse both the West African and African American narratives so I could work on something regardless of where I was traveling to, a new body of work that I could like reflect on. It was also around the time Trump's first election, so I was like getting away from figuration. I don't want to talk about black figures in front of these people because it was just, grad school is a shared trauma. But I wanted to create a studio practice where I could reflect on family, people that loved me, people that I loved, and not have to explain myself about it. And in traveling, after I started working on this kente quilt body of work, luckily it allowed me to travel to a lot of different places through residencies and things. And one of the really weird things about that, as being a person who identifies as growing up in the South also, is there would always be cohorts of people with like 12 people from Chicago all coming together and being friends with each other immediately, you know what I mean? Or 16 people from LA and you're the one Atlanta person. Always that one Atlanta person. It's like, but everywhere I went, they would always be like, yeah, but look, this guy was here. And he was everywhere. Mm-hmm. I'd pop up any residency I'd go to, Scout, he's been there. Like this, he's just like that one of them silent killers, you know? And Atlanta has that kind of relationship where we're a family first, and then we grow to learn more about individuals. Like I have one of Sheila's shirts, and when I was at Hambridge, it wasn't until somebody else told me it was Sheila's shirt. I've been wearing this thing for months, and I was like, it's from Clark Atlanta Museum. They're like, no, bro, that's Sheila's project. Like, I've known her I'm like, damn. But I love that. Like, and I think that's partially my relationship with Radcliffe. I've known of him. I've grown to learn about his practice a lot more over the years. through my travels and residencies and listening to lectures that he's done in certain places. And luckily, I was fortunate to meet him here in Atlanta a couple of years ago, later on in his life. But I wish I had gotten to know him in person while he was still here. But I think about him all the time in the studio.
Thank you. Michi Meko.
Hi, I'm Michi Meko. I'm from Florence, Alabama. And I'm a painter, sculptor, and
All around
a,
badass.
a maker of things. And if we're sharing these origin stories, my origin story for Radcliffe is BET and the Arrested Development video. And for me, growing up in Florence, Alabama, I'd never, beyond JJ, I'd never seen another black artist like actually moving. And that video at the time, I was so immersed into hip hop, that video at the time.
Tennessee.
Yeah, when that came out, I just remember those black and whites and like the speed and the expressiveness of that I recorded that on video, and then I would go back and watch this person.
Oh my God.
Whoever he was, I would just watch and then try to mimic and then watch and try to mimic and watch, because my heroes before Cliff were like the Thornton Dials and Lonnie Hollies, and because of Alabama and its nowhere nearness to art world at all, Radcliffe was like on my screen. My parents had a screen about this size, so on my screen and in my VCR, there was this figure doing that. And I had a brother who lived here already. My brother already lived here. I came to visit him one time, and we went out, and I think we went to Yin Yang or somewhere. I was way too young to be there wherever we went. And he introduced me to these people, and I shook his hand, and I was like, oh, like, that's the guy. He was like, I was like, hey, is that the dude from that video? He's like, yeah. And so in my brain, another light bulb went off, and I was like, I'm moving here. And so that was my first introduction to Radcliffe.
I love that so much, Michi. I do, because whenever I would mention Arrested Development to Radcliffe, he'd be like, shut up. He didn't want anybody to know, you know?
No, like he was the first black artist that I'd seen actually moving, and that wasn't like Jimmy Walker. You know what I mean?
That's powerful. Okay, Navin, how you gonna follow that up?
Well, can you guys hear me? Okay. I'm Navin Norling, and my origin story, if you want to get there, I guess, in that way. I'm originally from the Bay Area. I'm actually, this one? Is that me? Oh, okay. Okay. I'm like, so anyway, yeah, originally from the Bay Area. I usually kind of constrain this, start this idea with, I'm originally the first generation city person from my family, right? My family's from the rural South. My mother's from Louisiana. My father's from Bakersfield, California, but from Oklahoma. So, my parents, really tried to run away from Jim Crow and try to find, new opportunities, in the Bay Area, and a lot of black folks, in the Bay are from the South. A lot of us have that collective, source that we all have rooted from there, and so it's, for me, it's like this is sort of I'm gonna get back to about coming back down to be here, but being in the Bay, I went to school at CCAC, California College of Arts and Crafts. And I was, and I was originally an illustration major, but I
opportunity to work with, can you guys hear me if I put this down? Is that okay? I'm always a little nervous with these mics. Keep it up? Okay. Thank you. So the thing is that, for me, it's like I also was moonlighting as a street artist. I was working, I was doing street art, and that sort of moved into different realms of live art. And, I was also a kid in the 90s, and so hip hop in the 90s in the Bay, a lot of people were doing live art and stuff like that. And I did have an opportunity to meet Radcliffe back in the 90s. It was this interesting thing because you're just people, and at that point you're all young artists. Everybody's kind of like coming up and everything. That was sort of my first introduction to Radcliffe, and I knew about the video and all that stuff too as well. For me, it's like I went from the West Coast, from CCAC, I started working community arts, and that developed to a point where I wanted to sort of explore my own work, so I moved to New York. So I've gone across the country now, and I'm in New York, and I'm at Hunter College, and I got my master's there, and I was in painting. And that's when I had another run-in with Radcliffe. Because by then I'm in New York at grad school, and Radcliffe is now on the scene, and it's like he's already, a giant among younger artists, and so, always humble and able to approachable even at that point. And I was always just at awe of his work from afar, Also, I think that, for me, understanding about a lot of things about materiality and connections to installation is something that, that's been sort of part of threaded for me since the 90s. And so I think that, as I saw Radcliffe go on to great things, it was always an inspiration for me to see where I could take my work as well, And then in New York, I was in New York for about 25 years, and I did a lot of the residencies and Scout Huygens and things like that. But I never imagined myself being in the South, even though my work was always kind of driven by it. I talked a lot about identity and culture and the migration, and my work is all about breaking that up, and I'll talk about that, I guess, a little later. But still seeing these elements in Radcliffe's work, really just still resonate with me, even outside the way he organizes his work and presents it so strong. I had this opportunity now to come down to the South through invitation through SCAD, and that's where I'm a professor. Being here is about 7 years now. It was great to have those run-ins again with Radcliffe again. So it was like, a couple different shows. I got to run into him, and and still humble, still aloof as ever. But I'm going to see you. Yeah, we'll get together. Yeah, I'm going to call you, and I'll call you. I'm going to call you. Call him. Aloof. And then it's like, we have a lot of close friends, and I'll be like, hey, is everything cool? Yeah, he's like that. He's just aloof. I'm like, okay. So I definitely miss those opportunities to maybe have that run-in again with him, but it's great to be introduced to the work that's outside that I didn't even know existed. I do kind of try to go see work at the High regularly with his work and have that conversation with it, but that's my story. Okay.
I want to go back to Sheila while we have her work behind us. Atlanta and the South have played a strong role in shaping both of your practices, you and Radcliffe. How does geography inform your approach to history, identity, and storytelling through your lens-based practice?
Well, a lot, actually, because when I first arrived in Atlanta, can you hear me? In Atlanta, I didn't say this earlier, but Radcliffe was responsible for introducing me to X-Briggs at the Hammond's house. And I had my
Speak up a little bit, Sheila.
A group show with Charles Nelson, which is no longer with us, and I can't think of the other artist, and he's no longer with us. But that was my introduction of Radcliffe and Hammond House for the community of the arts here. And for me, my work and my practice is all about the narratives of the South, believe it or not. I feel that Atlanta, when I came to Atlanta, I've never seen so many black folks in my life, okay? Because my father, I'm a child of a daughter of a soldier, so we traveled around a lot. And so when I came here, it just opened up my mind. It was like I was like a little kid. And what informs me is the history of Atlanta, from the civil rights movement to the violence in the land. A lot of my work, if you see a landscape, is Invisible Empire. I wanted to talk about the violence in the land when it came to, back then, the KKK, but the white supremacy. So I tried to bring it more up into contemporary times to engage people. Yeah, that's one of the images right there, Stone Mountain. I actually made the images very dark and moody and beautiful, mystical, to draw you in, to talk about white supremacy. My first solo show was at the High Museum, and at the time, he wasn't the president then, Obama was running for office. I wanted to understand, I'm always questioning the why. And I wanted to understand why the millenniums, were they concerned about politics? Because that generation, I know when I was young, a lot of people when we're young, we brush the young people off like they don't know what they're talking about or they're doing. And I said, I beg the difference. So I went into my studio and started photographing these millenniums and asked them, when I say the word America, I give you a flag and do whatever you want with it. And it became a major body of work for me, and that's when I had my first solo show at the High. And so I think with my practice and what I do, even though it's lens-based and it's moving from conceptual to documentary to portraiture, I want people to not just look, I want you to hear and I want you to listen, okay? Because I think it's very important really in the times that we're living in right now with my work. That's Morgan. And a lot of these, well, Morgan, a lot of them, she was from California, and she never grew up around a lot of blacks. And she talked about the narratives of when she came here, about how Atlanta is so rooted in the legacy of the civil rights movement. Atlanta is rooted with black folks all around. And that's where you learn, I know me, learn my beginnings, even though I was older, about Southern culture, you know. Some people were telling me about the war, and I didn't know what they were talking about. And they said, well, Sheila, you have to say the war. I didn't know they were talking about the Civil War, okay? So I'm like a little kid and very naive, and I think that's why my work, I look at pop culture, I look what's going on in the world, and I bring it all together in contemporary times through photography.
Thank you. And this question is for all of you. How has Atlanta shaped your artistic voice, and what does it mean to create from this city as a foundation? Either one of you that want to take that one.
I'll take it. You know, being probably the one that's been here the least longest from you guys in Atlanta, I found that when my work was in the north or in New York or in the Bay, when it was talking about race, sometimes it had a certain pushback or a certain resistance, even if it was the most subtle. And when you guys see my work, you'll understand. I mean, I'm not pulling any punches out most of the time, and I'm trying to sort of get a reaction. But it was interesting to be in how sometimes the most banal thing that I would do would be triggering, to people up there. But coming down here, again, I just felt so much embrace. And I felt like, oh my God, and I'm from Oakland, where we have the civil rights. We pattern ourselves in the Bay Area after Atlanta. A lot of we were very connected in that way. we love to really talk about groundswell and community, and it's really patterned a lot after Atlanta. So this has been a huge influence for me, but it's still, you get a real resistance and like want to be sort of PC. But when I got down here, it was like, oh, you can put the gas on the pedal, man. And it's also maybe also a sign of the times, it's like, but I feel like now more important, Atlanta's more important than ever with our history here, our collective history. And I think that we need to like push it more and less corporate, push it more, not ask, take some more initiative in our public art a little bit more. I mean, I feel like we want to honor our history, but we also want to push this because it's getting pushed back on us right now, I feel a lot, so.
Anyone else?
What was the?
How has Atlanta shaped your
shaped
artistic voice, and what
Oh.
does it mean to create from this city as a foundation?
Well, for me, again, it was a place like Sheila. I'd never seen so many black people ever, and then like black people in charge of things, like the bank and the grocery and like the doctor and I'd never experienced that, and so once I did get here, and I'm a hothead, and I was more arrogant than I am now. I'm not. But I did meet Ed Spriggs, and that was one of the only places I remembered how to get to from hanging out with my brother was to the Hammond's house. And I came with a portfolio. I got off the exit, like on the way to my brother's house, got off the exit with my little portfolio and slides, went to the Hammond's house like, I'm fixing to do this. And he was like, no, you're not ready. And so that was my introduction to Atlanta's art scene. And that no, you're not ready has fueled to this seat. But along the way, I got to meet all of my heroes like Radcliffe and Kevin and Eric Mack and Charles and Kojo. It was
Kojo, yeah.
That group is what I tried to become.
Let's talk about this. Like, when you sent this image, when I opened this image, I was like, oh my God. Like, it just looks so dreamy. And it looks like this spiritual experience. Like, I can imagine walking into that space and just losing myself. Can you talk about the transition of being able to develop work at this scale, yet keeping your artistic integrity and voice through the work?
That goes back to another sort of 15-year-old me, and seeing there was a time when the High Museum had an exhibition of Matisse, and Matisse was the first art book that I was able to buy, and for some reason everything in the book is this size, you know? And so my love of Matisse comes from just having that book, like, oh, you get to pick out a book this Sunday, and that was the first book that I picked out. But then my mom brought me over here sometime I was 15 or 16, and the High had a Matisse show, and we went to see the Matisse show, and then I realized, like, holy, like, some of these things are huge, 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 huge. And so from that, I always wanted to just go big, like Matisse. And then, but also at the same time of walking out of there, there was this little red Basquiat on the way out.
I know that Basquiat.
And I was like, oh, like that's the other dude from my book. You know, like my art references is a guy with a video, and a Matisse book. And so I think that I work at that scale because I want the work that I make to be felt. Like, I want it to be intimidating. I want it to be over life size. And I want it to have a certain presence to it. So when I walk away from it, it is still there just bragging on you. Like Michi made this.
Preach,
And you're
preach,
going
brother,
to look
preach.
at me, right? And
Right.
so with that comes the mysticism and all of that that I sort of sampled because I'm from the 90s, from Radcliffe and Kevin and those guys. Because the funny thing is, like, you would meet those guys, then you would see them, and it's like they would disappear. And then at some point they would vaporize, and then they would just poof, disappear. And so for me, that was like they must have been part of some mystic school. I want.
I love that. So each of you use materials, clay, wood, photographs, maps, found objects, as vessels of history. What can materials communicate that words cannot? We got time. We got time. Who wants to take that first?
Go.
I think in photography, the images that you see up here is how I shoot the images. And for example, in Invisible Empire, like I repeated before, I always went up there in Stone Mountain when it was rainy and mystical. I call it mystical to draw people into. W.B. Du Bois said this. He said it was something about Georgia that was beautiful, but it was something very disturbing. So I wanted to make it beautiful and disturbing through the photographs.
A two?
Um,
Because you're all about that materiality.
love material, you know.
I
love
know you do.
material. Again, I'd have to go back to the AUC and the teachers that I had there. They're back to this Atlanta question too, though. But Charles Nelson was like the first person to share
Come on, Charles Nelson, say
my
it.
work, and like I remember he told me to apply for this show, and in Las Vegas, and I was like, "What do you mean, Las Vegas? Like that's on the other side of the country." I couldn't understand it at that age. Like I was like, "What?" And then seeing Frank Toby Martin make larger-than-life sculptures with the same materials and tools that I had to use, and he never had excuses. So all the students would always have excuses, and he's like, "But look, we're doing the same shows right in front of you." Arturo Lindsay will talk about history in a way that leaves you so over-prepared when you leave. Like you go to other schools and you're like, these people aren't talking about anything, because you know the backstories of which artist was sleeping on whose couch for Dada to happen, and what books they were reading, and the music they were listening to, and he'll give you examples of whose houses he slept at, and it made you like want to be a part of it, right? So I'm learning about these people, and they didn't accept excuses. Arturo would be like, "Yo, if we're painting and you are out of red, you better use ketchup, make it happen." Like, so when you're dealing with these artists that are operating and working with craft in a way that like informs so many different materials that they touch, you know their hand is in it when you walk up to it. It's like a record of their time spent with that thing. And you can feel their presence in these moments. You can walk to a Frank Toby Martin sculpture and see like he's not playing games with that welding and how clean those lines are. And I move in a similar way now because I think, one, I had to deal with them, but two, like, you see how they move. Like, they're like, you ain't got no choice. Like, you gonna put your name on it, you better, like, you're not coming back to work on it again. You better put it in there, like, you know what I mean? So I think all these artists are great examples of, like, how their practices, they work in all kinds of mediums, but you might know them for one thing, right? But when you see them touch a material, they execute with the same level of, like, Radcliffe dancing with Georgia Clay, you know, in the studio. Like, there's the same intentionality and purpose and movement. So it's like, it's a weird way to, like, think of it, but materials are just like tools. You pick and choose them, like you're baking. Depending on the recipe, you know, it needs this or it needs this, but you know what you need to, the attention you need to spend for it to do a thing, or else you're just lying to yourself. The material will tell you you're lying to yourself.
Can I add on that?
Yeah.
Well, for me, I think, much like Radcliffe, I think there's a relationship that I was trying to form, that I'm trying to form with my materials, or where things will sit for a while, and I'll wait for them to communicate what they want to become. And I think that materials choose you, like they pop up whenever you need them to. And that was always one of the things that I liked about this work was, like, where is he sourcing this stuff? And it always bugged me as a collector of stuff. Like, he has got better things, so I have to continue to look for more things. And then the way that he would use materials or blow things up, and then I'd look in my sketchbook, I was like, how did he beat me to that? So then, because of this person, I now have to work harder, you know? Because there's certain things that are all his. And from my generation, we would call that biting. And so if there is glitter in my work, I have to acknowledge to you all that there is glitter in Radcliffe's work. And if my paintings are black, I have to acknowledge to you guys that, yes, I have seen those Radcliffe paintings. And if I'm thinking about materials, there are a couple of artists in this world where if I'm thinking about an idea, I go look on the website or in my book, if I have that book of that artist, and I look at the material choices that they have made, what they have said with that material, and I search for things that they have not touched. And between Radcliffe, David Hammonds, and Nari Ward, Kevin Sipp, there's a lot of things you cannot touch.
Thorndile.
And Thorndile, right? And so it forces you to become a better artist. It forces you to develop your own sort of mysticism and relationship with artists, with the objects.
I laugh when you mention where is he getting the materials. There was a time when Radcliffe would create a body of work, he would call me over and say, Karen, just come look at it and let's talk about it. And I remember once I went into the studio, you all may have seen this work, it's been at auction, I think it's in the collection of some significant museum, but it's a blank looking canvas with this alligator carcass in the center of it, you know? And I walk in, I'm looking at the work, and I said, what the hell is that, Radcliffe? And he says, that's an antique African alligator. I said, how do you know? Who told you that? You know? And we just went back and forth with the banter, you know. And I think that's why, part of the reason why he would call me over, because I would look at certain things and go, well, where did that come from, you know? But we had so much banter about that piece, and I just kept telling him, I said, somebody ripped you off, because that is not an antique alligator carcass.
A funny story about that, I was at one of these events, and it was people in the room, and they were doing this thing, and this guy introduced me. One of my mentors introduced me to this guy, and he was like, yeah, this is so-and-so. He introduced himself. He was like, yeah, I was one of Radcliffe's antique dealers. And I was like, I've been looking for you. And he was like, yeah, he started naming off some of the objects that he had helped him find, because he would say, Radcliffe would call him and be like, hey, I need blah. And this person would go all over the world, globes, and find these objects for Cliff. And for me, it was like another thing unlocked. And I was like, wow, this dude had a insane. It's good.
A network.
He told me that there was wood in one of these pieces that came from somewhere in Europe, and they were horse stable floors that were in carts, and they were all stomped down and already patinaed, and he said he showed them to Cliff, and he got them all, and they came from Europe somewhere.
So, I'm glad you brought Neri Ward up because he's one of my professors from Hunter, right? And so, one thing he would say is like, don't prop it, nail it,
Yeah.
make it solid. And so, also I'd like to include Whitfield Ovell in that
Oh,
group.
yeah, dude.
And I'd also like to include Leonardo Drew, but there's probably even a dozen more people we could probably think of. But, I think that for me, I get what you're saying about the material idea, about looking at those, those guys from the past, even, I'm thinking of some other people, but the one thing I have to say is that for me, it's like my grandfather used to be a collector of everything. Like, he was a farmer, so everything, nothing went to waste. And so I remember like sort of seeing that sort of idea of like never going away. I think that's sort of a mentality that a lot of us have in our collective energy, right? And I think that I get the point of like trying to not make it the Neri Ward or the Radcliffe Bailey remix, but materials, they do speak to us, and sometimes it's like about like, for me, I am a dumpster diver. I definitely feel the energy of entropy and ideas of things that have a history, and I tap into that idea of nostalgia, and I think that we don't want to like completely give that up, because it is still something that is relevant to our culture and how we make our work and think about it. But I definitely understand that think about not making another Basquiat or another,
Yeah,
that's
fighting.
Yeah, exactly. But yes, I think that there's still a real connection to the materiality because of what it represents, what you can make as the narrative now, reinvent the narrative. Like, when you're saying that piece, I mean, I have all kinds of things coming in my head that I dig that. I completely understand why I would have acquired it, and yes, understand why you would be out there, having somebody out looking for things. I wish I could have that. Wow. I mean, but yes, I think that the material sometimes speaks for itself. Sometimes it's something we can't have any control over. We have to. We're possessed by it when we're in that type of art making process.
And one last question before we open up to the floor. Across your practices, resilience and healing surface again and again. Do you see your art as a lifeline for yourselves, for your communities, or for history itself?
Okay. Go ahead.
Yes. Yes. I think for me, I want to leave a narrative that I was here, and then I want to also leave a narrative of the people who look like me, that we were here. But then I also want to leave nuggets. If you can read my work well enough, you can see who my heroes are. And they are all rooted in a Southernism. And so that whole Andre 3000 thing, the South's got something to say, is part of the legacy that I want to leave. But then also, if there is a timeline, I always imagine that on the timeline, that I could, in history, I could get my name behind Radcliffe.
For me, it's about the blueprint of us and our culture. And I think it's very important for art, especially, I guess with all of us, to leave these narratives for the younger generation. because now I'm an image maker, but now I'm an archivist. I'm looking back at my work and reinterpreting it, and also with younger generations reinterpreting my work, because we can't forget, because our narratives are being changed. So it's not really about me, it's about the work and the blueprint, because we are the culture.
Yeah, art has really given me an opportunity to just like, I don't know. It's carved out space for me to continue searching the things that I've always been interested in since I was a kid. I can be an architect if I want. I can be an engineer if I want. I can do all of it under the auspices of like being an artist, right? And I think when I was making a lot of this recent work, thinking a lot about sustainability, not just in material choices, but also like movements of the body. Like how a lot of printmakers I love have these arched backs because they're doing that work all the time. And I'm like, all right, well, if I want to keep doing this, because I'm in my 30s now, I'm going to get into my 40s and 50s and 60s. I'm like, well, how do I create an act of moving that will allow me to keep doing this? So in an ironic way, it's like, yeah, there are a lot of table saws and dangerous acts and stuff in it, but it's a very meditative, slow, listen to the material process that allows me to...
Can I hold on? Because we have one of your images. Like, when you say meditative and slow, like for this piece,
Yeah.
the common question, how long did that take you to make it?
Everybody wants to... Yeah, no, each 3-inch by 3-inch square is a block that probably takes about a week to make. Every day is cutting pieces down. So every time you see two different colors touching each other, like I have to glue it, clamp it, unclamp it, plane it, join it, find another piece to put to it, and then I get one 3-inch by 3-inch thing. And I slice them down and put it to the side. And the next day, I start working on the next 3-inch by 3-inch. So this is like a year and a half, probably like a year worth of different patterns of just showing up every day, right? But it gives me an opportunity to react to the world in my studio and not show my emotions outward. I can get angry. I can go to the studio and be like, I'm too pissed. I don't need it. I just water my plants and go home. I can mourn. I just lost my dad recently, earlier in the year. And
Sorry.
Thank you. But thinking of, like, and I was working on this huge commission, like 84 feet. I was telling you about this, and it was like, it gave me a space to work through a lot of things. And thinking back about Radcliffe and that Olympic piece at the airport, that was like 40 feet that he did in like 2 months right after losing his grandmother and his aunt to cancer. It's like it gives you a space to mourn and really think through these things and keep these people alive. Spend time with them. So you can, yeah, there's a lot of blessings to the artistic practice that just keeps me sane as a person. Studio can keep you sane in that weird way.
And how about you, Navin? When you think about your impact and your legacy, how do you hope audiences carry the work forward?
Well, you know, I think a lot about my grandfather when I was in my like 20s, and he had it. It was like it was the last birthday we had celebrated, but he had just came to my first show in San Francisco. It was like my biggest show at that time, and he surprised me out of the blue coming, and it was just like, and then that next weekend we were in Bakersfield, and I had seen they had a big birthday party for him, and it was a celebration, and it was like tears were coming up because people that were like way older than I would have imagined to come up there to cry about that he had fed them, you know, he had brought food to them, you know, because they give you subsidies as in the, you know, the farmers, they don't want you to grow but so much, and then they make you can't bring it to the market, and you have to literally do something with it. So he would give it to family, extended family, neighbors, and these people came in line just to come up to thank him about how he took care of them, and it just was so impactful for me that I want to be that kind of, have that impact with my work. You know, I want to give people food for thought to think about what's going on, question. And my work can be very topical at the moment, but it's also thinking about things from the past. And so I'm always trying to sort of bring these into the work in a way that is coded like you do, right? In a way that is like pushes that agenda without having to be so overt, at times, and still making noise like you were talking about. And so I'm trying to just make work that really hopefully will touch people, and maybe they'll just kind of have that moment, and maybe it'll carry on with them.
Thank you. So now we'd like to open up the floor. If any of you have any questions, we have a microphone here, and we will have one there shortly on the other side.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, CK.
Am I on? Yeah, okay. Thank you for the discussion today. I'm curious, a few of you have mentioned, sort of back in the day, making work 20 years ago. You mentioned that time when sort of Kojo and Charles Huntley Nelson were doing their thing. And I wonder if your experience of making work specifically in Atlanta has changed, and if so, how that has developed in terms of, whether it's process or in terms of reception, or just anything you would have to say about that. Thank you.
For me, I don't know anything else but Atlanta. It is here where I start to develop as an artist, and it is looking at those artists before me that were already here and having those become mentors and heroes that inform my studio practice now. And so, I came here right after college, and Atlanta is all that.
This place is almost like enchanted too, in a weird way. Like so many people have been through here, so it's like,
It's real life Wakanda.
yeah. Like I remember when I was at Morehouse again, learning about like sample pickers and everybody. You were helping us learn about a bunch of people's practices, but watching Fahamu in real time, doing the battling thing with Fabian, right? Yeah. And just wanting to be close to it. Yeah. So there are like pictures of me back in college, like holding Fahamu's wrestling belt, and I didn't realize it was at the Atlanta Contemporary. Yeah. Now I have the studio at the Atlanta Contemporary. Didn't realize Donald Locke had the studio before and had like little parties, and they were having dinner in that same studio. So it's like you're walking through these spaces and you're like, he built that shelf. They probably had dinner right here. Yeah. Oh, it's just my studio. Like, how surreal is that? I didn't plan that. Mm-hmm. But there's so many spaces like that around Atlanta where it's just like you can't help but be inspired by the space. Mm-hmm. So I think we're kind of chasing that same thing that's always been here, though.
I think that we have a responsibility.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Hi, wonderful talk overall. My question for you all is that you've done a lovely job talking about your lived experiences and how coming to Atlanta was this overall process, and it's really interesting to hear them all from different perspectives at different times and different years, different decades even. My question for you, can you guys hear me? So I'll make sure it's coming. My question for you would be, if, let's say you were your younger selves and you had a chance and you were coming to Atlanta in 2025, what would be your perspective on that? How would you approach that experience? What are things maybe you've learned in now that you would apply in hindsight, perhaps?
I wouldn't come to Atlanta in 2025.
That's really hard. Yeah. It's really hard for me because I wasn't raised in the South, and if it was my younger self, and if I was in the South, I probably would think a little bit differently than anything. But for me, the way that I think and I process information and what I see, because it's not just Atlanta, it's the South, period. Because there's a relationship. Atlanta is in the South, but I've been moving towards Brunswick, Georgia. I didn't realize that I had an uncle in the 60s that practiced MD at Brunswick and with the Gullah Geechee. And so I'm looking back to our ancestors over in West Africa. So I think the way that I think and I process now, because I think about Radcliffe a lot, because he was the passage when he talked about the ancestors, you know, all of that. And I was with him with his last days, and he told me that I have photographed his sculpture. We don't have it up here in the park. Where's the park at, Sue?
Cascade Springs.
Yeah, he wanted that to be a community for everybody to come. And I don't think nothing is going on with that right now, you know. It is? Okay. Yeah, and, right, and so when I took photographs of that work and went over to his house, it was Kevin and I, the last week, I'm going to cheer up, and he was like a little kid, and he said, do you know how I made this, came up with this concept? I said, no. He said, I was playing with Legos. And that's how I thought about that. And then he looked at me, and he said, you're Surrealism. And I've been thinking about that a lot with him and his work. And if you reframe that work, I can look at it that way. It's all, when it comes to our culture, it's always been surreal with us. And so my thinking is thinking more like that and being more conceptual with my work that I'm doing now, which I haven't shown anybody. I'm very silent right now.
If I just moved here, I would have saved a lot more money than I did before I came. I came here with $400. I shot from a mean pool game, so I wouldn't do that. I would have more. Unfortunately, you will never get to experience Atlanta's warehouse art culture. So I would look for a crew and build a crew and pool your money together. And if one person has a writing skill, then they're the group writer. If another person has building skills or electric skills or whatever skills, I would pool those skills together and apply for every grant in America and the world and create a self-nepotism for yourself. And then I would party just as much as I did. And I would still run the streets. I would still do graffiti. But I would employ my crew to be more than just a name. I would put that crew to work. And I absolutely did that with the Smoke School of Art, where we were.
Yeah, I was about to mention Smoke
That-
School, yeah.
That entire thing was a place to create education for younger black artists so that you, in some sense, would have the whole armor of God and nothing could penetrate you once you left Atlanta to go into the art world. You knew everything. You knew art history. You knew philosophy, whether it was French or Cuban. We talked about everything, studied everything, but the entire basis for that was to create a nepotism between 4 or 5 friends. We can absolutely do that. So that's, if you're young, I would get a crew of people you trust and build that circle of trust and get all the grants that you could get, because you can apply singularly and then you can apply as the crew or as the group. So that way I pay Ato. He knows how to run them saws. I don't. We need photographs. That way that grant money pays her. Boom. We need more materials. Maven's like, I got him. Boom, we pay him. Now we need somebody to talk about the work. Boom, we pay Karen, and then we get the project done. I would be as slick as you could. And if you're young, like look for people like this on this stage who can give you those histories that we just talked about, but then you can take those histories and start to build your own.
Atlanta is also just so, like, it's so easy to access so many really special people. There's so many, like, every day there's like a Pulitzer Prize person walking right in front of you here, or this person, like, there's so many special people here. And it's like, they're like black superheroes to me. Like, I remember being in the airport once and seeing this one artist, very well-known black guy, very, very tall, just sitting in the food court, and everybody was walking right past him. I was like, does nobody know who he is? And it was just like, you know, it's like, don't bother, he's in the wild. Like, it's kind of beautiful, observed from afar. But that's like a superpower that is present here. And I think that Southern home feel that you can, everybody is trying to balance with their artistic practice. I mean, I would highly recommend going and trying to live other places, but you'll learn that, like, yeah, you do have to work 3 jobs and not take showers in New York to make money to pay rent. Like, to make work to pay rent. Or you can go to California and studio practice lacks a little bit, but you take better care of your health. You can make all those choices here and be closer to family.
It's cheaper.
And it's cheaper. And there's so many wonderful people that I care about and think about on a daily basis that are down here because none of us like the cold. You can always go visit it.
Yeah.
But Atlanta is just, it's like, it has that I think a lot of people need to leave first before you realize, oh.
But the
This is why.
thing that I think about Atlanta artists, though, which is I'll never back off of it. And I will fight anybody up north, like, because I got that kind of attitude. I think that once you live here, make art here, and you build your success here, you are prepared for the world. And that's because we are constantly building our foundation, and the foundation is constantly crumbling, so we're constantly building it back. And then, boom, we have to DIY again, and we have to start the process again, and then you're showing specifically for your friends, and then somewhere in there, there's a collector that comes, or your name gets out. And then the next thing you know, there's a gallery, like what you first talked about, that comes and gets you, and then you can conquer the world. And that's the way that I sort of see Radcliffe, and that's the way that I sort of see all of our trajectories, that if you put an Atlanta artist in a room with any other artist anywhere else, I believe that the Atlanta artist would outdo any other artist in the world, because we have to do it ourselves. And while we're making work, we're building a foundation at the same time. And one of my experiences is when I first, boom, went to the big gallery, they asked me, what do you need? They had assistants, they had all the things. I said, I need a broom, a boombox, and a ladder. And that's been my attitude. And I think that every artist in Atlanta knows how to get it done themselves.
That's because we have to, you have to, right. And like you said, the systems are built and then they crumble, and then you have to rediscover, and in that rediscovery, you have to do it for yourselves. I often think about the arts community here, and it's great for the artist who's going to do their own pop-up. And now you have social media. You can do anything with social media, and really just put yourself out there. But you have to push yourself, because we have limited opportunities for exhibition, for people who write about, everything. Like now, the writing and the publicity piece of it, that's crumbling, which is a frustration to me, because it's like, okay, you're doing this dynamic work. Who's going to write critically about it? Where's that going to happen? So now we're going to have independent writers to come and write about it and put it out there, But that's what Atlanta has been, a constant regeneration of this small community.
I'm going to say something because I'm the one that's the newest here, but in that way, I think that I agree with everything that's been said here. I think it's going to be very important.
You did your own pop-ups when you first got here.
Absolutely. I
Yes.
think that, no, No, absolutely. I think that I come from the 90s. I'm a baby boomer, well, not a baby boomer, what am I, next generation X? I put it on my shoulders, right? Kind of thing, I guess, if you want to call it. But yeah, I think that, coming from that sort of background, I found so much opportunity here. I was like, coming from New York, I agree, the struggle in living in New York, I owned in New York, I had a place in New York, but it wasn't, and I had a gallery in New York, but it was still a struggle, a life struggle all the time. And it is something that I remember, there was an artist who said that it's like, Moby had said something like this: if you want to be in New York, you got to be already a superstar. You can't be a struggling artist, doing that. And I feel like coming here, I found that I could actually rent an apartment that I could work in and do my work until, I got myself out or found other opportunities where there were spaces, and there's lots of places here that are community, community artists, and I kind of involved myself with that. And I think that there's just a way to have a quality life here as an artist and still not be so pressed about selling, but also be able to focus on the quality of your work, making the good work. What I feel for Atlanta is that I want this place to be a place where you have to come down here to get that taste. You got to come down here to get that feel. Yes, you'll see it in New York. You'll see Michi in New York, but you want to get that real stank, you want to come down here. You know what I mean? And I think that's really important that we keep our focus on that we want to have our out extension, but also make it where we make stuff and we build our community within that makes it where we can actually have something that draws people here. Even like with this fair, making sure that we have a lot of representation of Atlanta artists, make sure that it's not just about them bringing others here, it's about us showing Atlanta artists here that you can actually get that insight here. That's gonna be really important. As we build on these things, because we need to build on them. We need to build this community more, this art community here. Yeah, who's gonna run it? Who's gonna run it? Who's gonna run it?
Yeah,
That's right.
Yeah, I said more of a foundation here because we only have one museum. I mean, with all what Atlanta and the money coming out of Atlanta, why don't we have a major African-American museum here? I knew Fahamu is trying to do it, but he can't get the money to do it because it's going to take billions of dollars to do that. But
Not like we don't have money here. We got
no, that's what I was
Depots,
saying. We
got
do,
deltas.
but we have to have a foundation here. If not, we could talk about Atlanta and that, but people are not looking at Atlanta. I travel a lot, and a lot of people, even though Atlanta coined the term Atlanta influenced everything, and when I'm outside of Atlanta, they look at Atlanta a little bit different, though. They really do. And I'm just being real because of my travels and what I've experienced and stuff. Because all of the work that I have done is in Atlanta, but my success is outside of Atlanta.
Hi, Tina.
Hi. Great conversation. I just wanted to add to, I think, we're talking about Atlanta in a way, for me personally, having been here half a century, coming in as the young artist that you all are referring to. But I think there's something I think it's really important for us to remember about the fact that we are in America and the way we think about culture in general, and this idea of, what's seen and what's not seen as representing quote unquote mainstream culture versus the culture of minorities, of African Americans as such. And so when I think about, I represent the former director, founding director of Clark Atlanta University Art Museum. And then, of course, there is the Spelman Art Museum. And the HBCUs in general, of course, the nation at this point are the repositories of culture. So in Atlanta, when we're referring to the High Museum of Art, but there are other museums that have come up certainly the university museums have been in the space for a very long time. Of course, there's MoCA GA. And I don't know who the Path Museum is. I see things coming up along the way that I'm not even familiar with at this time. But I think it's really important that we pay attention to how we really think about culture in general and just how we perceive ourselves in this dynamic mess that we're in. Anyway.
Can I speak? Yeah. This conversation kind of reminds me, does everyone know who Tony Hawk is in this room? He's a professional skateboarder. Yeah. He's like the most famous skateboarder in the world. I used to skateboard. I'm from California. I was really into it. I almost was a professional skateboarder, sponsored or whatever. My mom thought that was weird that people were giving free products to me, so she kind of shut that down. But there was a moment in skateboarding in the early 80s, mid 80s, where all the people that were making tons of money in the whole country, it just shut down. And I think we're having that moment in our art community right now. And I think that this is my third art market that I've been in. I almost moved to Miami, so that would have been my fourth. I think that we're being very insular in all the markets, and I think we need to look towards each other, and we need to start fanning out. We need to be checking people's DMs, hitting people up even across the pond. We need to be in different states. We need to Voltron together right now, because I think everyone talking about their own, like in San Francisco, LA, they have their community. New York, they have their community. The communities, they grow. The representatives, they get their money, they get on. They like you said, the nepotism gets spread around, but somehow magically, it always stays insular. And that happened in the skateboard community, and all the money just dropped out. So Tony Hawk created the X Games to save the whole skateboarding community. Because if he didn't create the X Games, no one would know about how dope the skateboarding community was all over. And I feel we're at that moment right now. We need an X game.
Can I say
Thank
something
you.
about that? I was on another talk before about that, and Georgia and the bigger part of Georgia, not just Atlanta. I think that we need to start looking around all parts of Georgia, try to sort of bring that opportunity where we highlight not just this city but other parts. And I think we so centered on Atlanta that we forget that Georgia is a bigger state, and we kind of have to start thinking about our bigger community within our culture here in Georgia itself.
And I think that will be our last comment. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Kevin? Kevin, you'll be our last question.
Okay. I just wanted to first pose I had a little pushback on the premise, because Radcliffe and I were educated by, of course, Ed Spriggs at the Hammond's house, and I was working there forever, but we were also interns there. But I have to give a shout out to the AU Center and the professors who taught there, because I'll agree that Radcliffe became a very, very famous artist globally, but he did not set the stage, I would say. And he would admit that we learned how to do it by watching Frank Toby Martin, by watching Curtis Patterson on Arturo, and listening to the professors like Akua McDaniel. So we were learning how to do it globally better, and they wanted us to do it better. But that's the only pushback I had. I have to give a shout out to the AU Center and the professors there, Ed Spriggs, and his connection to the Studio Museum in Harlem, and the things that we've forgotten about, like the National Conference of Artists. There were people who didn't even remember that it started here in Atlanta, because we have this problem in Atlanta where we do things globally, but the generation come after us may forget what was done, and we reinvent the wheel. So one of the things I think we
Part
need
of that
to do,
issue, I'm sorry, let me
Yeah.
interject.
Yeah.
Part of the issue in the forgetting is that we don't have the press coverage that we need
I
to
agree.
document what we're doing. And that's,
but it's not
that's-
just about the press coverage. It's also about our own internal archivists.
But that's what I mean,
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
because the press coverage will become the archive.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have anybody, if we don't have anybody writing about the things that are happening here, there is no archive.
No, I totally agree. So that's why I said that was the only little pushback, because I bring it up because I was talking to a friend in Detroit, and he was talking about the National Conference of Artists and how they created this global network of artists for us here in Atlanta to kind of reach beyond that. But he thought it was created in Detroit or New York. They still have chapters and we don't. So we kind of keep reinventing the wheel, but, and I agree totally, we need more writers, we need more historians, and we need more people to remind ourselves that we've always been a global city when it came to African American artists. We just keep forgetting that we are a global city. So.
And at Clark Atlanta Museum, they have one of the largest Tina Wright archives of artists' work, and I forgot to mention that because Radcliffe is the one that introduced me to Tina. Yeah.
This is also goes
Thank
back to
you.
that like concept of family that I was talking about, that Radcliffe was part of this larger family, right? And he, on this, in a sense, in platforms would always remember those names. And so you're seeing these talks happening in New York and spaces that you wouldn't necessarily hear these names being summoned, but Radcliffe was making sure he was reminding people there's a lot happening back there. You know what I mean? And you're gonna come here and I'll show you the rest of it. But like he'll go elsewhere and tell you about these names. And I think that's super, super important.
Yeah, we could go on and on. But thank you so much to all of the artists and to all of you for being here today.